Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Invisible Disabilities and Creative Spaces webinar. We very much appreciate you taking the time today to join us. This is the final webinar in the ArtsBuild Ontario's learning series on accessibility, a series of 6 webinars that have covered the design of public spaces standard and the accessibility in creative spaces. My name is Thea Curdy, and I'm your lucky host for today's webinar. I'm also the Vice President of Designable Environments, one of Canada's leading accessibility and universal design firms for the built environment. We are currently working with ArtsBuild Ontario as consultants for both this fabulous webinar series and the creation of a new, soon-to-be published, toolkit to support accessibility in creative spaces. We are delighted to be joined today with our presenters, Alex Balmer, who is an accessibility consultant and actor, as well as Andrea Gurza, a disability awareness consultant. We will be handing things over to them in just a minute, but first, a few housekeeping items before we get started. 1, please be aware you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Your microphones have been disabled for the webinar, but we hope you can hear us through your speakers or headphones. You can adjust the sound for yourself by clicking on the speaker icon at the top of this meeting window. Number 2, we are offering closed captioning throughout the webinar today. The closed caption appears at the bottom of your meeting room screen called Caption Stream Pod, where you, as a participant, can change the font type, size, and color to suit your needs. Would a participant please help us by confirming in the chat box at the bottom right of the screen by typing that they can see the closed captioning and hear us clearly. Fantastic, thank you very much. A record of the closed captioning will be sent to participants following the webinar and will also be made available on our website. Also, we have a video camera that will be being displayed later on in the presentation, and it will be turned on at that time. If you're having trouble seeing it, please let us know again in the chat window. Last 3 things before we get started. 1, we will be recording this session, and a link will be emailed to everyone who's participating today following the webinar. Also, very important, 2, we will be emailing a quick survey after the webinar. We ask that you complete this survey so ArtsBuild Ontario can continue to improve their learning series for creative spaces. And 3, lastly, we have approximately 10 minutes at the end to answer your questions. Please use the chat box in the bottom right to type in your questions, and we will get to as many as possible. Please note that unfortunately, the chat box function at the bottom right of the screen is not accessible using a screen reader. So if that chat box is not working for your needs, and if you do have questions, we don't want to miss out on them. Please email them instead to aaron@artsbuildontario.ca, and we will ask them during the question and answer period. Our agenda today includes 3 items. We're going to do a quick recap about the AODA and things that we covered in our last amazing webinar called Safety, Fire Codes, and Accessibility in Creative Spaces. Then we will go on to have the 2 presentations today on today's topic about invisible disabilities and creative spaces. And finally, we will have our question and answer period. So, quick recap of the AODA and the design of public spaces. In the very first seminar of this series, we talked about this in much more detail, so please check that out if you didn't see it or if you want more information. We discussed what exactly is a disability. We considered the fact that people with disabilities are really the minority of everyone. Everyone either currently has a disability, knows someone who has a disability, or through illness, accident, or aging, have a disability at some point in their life. So the number of people this helps is tremendous. We also considered understanding the law. So what does AODA stand for? It stands for Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. The goal of the Act is to make Ontario accessible by 2025. It is based on three important details: equality, dignity, and respect. There are also 5 other requirements related to the law under the Integrated Accessibility Standard. The first is customer service. The second is information and communication. The third is employment. The fourth is transportation. And the fifth is the design of public spaces. The design of public spaces part of the AODA deals mostly with buildings. And for most buildings, that means the exterior path of your travel, your outdoor public eating spaces, the outdoor play spaces, technical problems here, accessible parking, which includes type A size parking for vans, type B size parking for cars. And there are 3 elements that happen inside the building. The first is service counters, the second is fixed queuing guides, and the third are waiting areas with a minimum of 3% seating available for people using mobility disability devices. So when we look at the Ontario Building Code, one of the things that most people aren't aware of is that it has limited accessibility requirements as a part of the regulations. You can build a building that's fully complies with the building code, but the question is, would it be fully inclusive? Because it mostly focuses on individuals who use wheelchairs, the answer is probably no. And it doesn't solve for the full range of abilities people have. This means we provided extra resources. We also talked about the hierarchy of the laws. Many people aren't aware that the Ontario Human Rights Code has primacy or supersedes both the Ontario Building Code, known as the OBC, and the AODA. As a part of the Planning Act, the Ontario Building Code Act, and the Accessibilities for Disabilities Act, these all must comply with the intent of the code. And the code is tries to ensure that we never create spaces that discriminate against people with disabilities. There is a clause about undue hardship for organizations. I encourage you to look for further information on the Ontario Human Rights Code website. So finally, we provided great resources for you that will be available to you through the website. The first is the AODA customer service information that you need to be applying in training for your staff. The second is the AODA information and communication standard, what things to be considering about how to make information accessible to people and things about your website. The AODA employment standard and how to be making sure your hiring practices are inclusive for people with disabilities. And then finally, of course, the design of public spaces. And we provided a link to the illustrated technical guide for the design of public spaces to make it all very simple for you. If you have any questions about the AODA or the design of public spaces standard, you are welcome to contact the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility. On this slide, we've given you a variety of different ways to contact them through their website, through their telephone numbers, through their Twitter account, through their Facebook account, through their YouTube channel, and through their email address. So we just wanted to do a quick recap of what was covered in webinar number 5. This is the Safety, Fire Codes, and Accessibility in Creative Spaces webinar. Our first presenter was Martin Day of Safety Media Inc. Martin was a dynamic speaker who spoke to us about the Fire Code Companion to the Ontario Building Code, a separate document that talks about what needs to happen to keep people safe. The idea of promoting fire safety attitude in a building from a facilities management all the way to an operational. That the fire safety plans, the best ones, follow approach that's called 4Ps that happened under Part 2 and 6. He explained what the 4Ps were. He talked about what the table of contents was and how to make your plans accessible. He also reviewed with us how his company is working on accessible signage requirements with things like Braille on safety exit signage, as well as QR codes, so that things can be displayed in multiple languages. We then were tremendously lucky to also have speaking with us Marnie Peters from Accessibility Simplified. Marnie mentioned her work that she'd done to make the Ottawa Art Gallery and the Museum of Nature to be accessible, among many others. The importance of being able to get out of a building on an accessible route with directional signage to an accessible exit. That's something that's not required by the building code. How the OBC was updated in 2015 and what those requirements were related to safety, both visual alarms and that we need to probably do more than the minimum required. Audible and visual announcements during emergencies are critical. If you're providing an audible message, how are you also providing that visually for people who can't hear? How to use the request for proposal in your planning as a tool to set higher standards for your buildings, your renovations, as a part of the design contract. She reviewed areas of refuge or rescue assistance, emergency evacuation chairs, and evacuation maps. Thinking about providing accessible information for your staff and your visitors is critical, and she mentioned as one of the great resources presently available is from the Canadian Labour Code. So if you didn't get a chance to see it, you certainly should go back and have a look at it. Now, I want to do a quick introduction to our two amazing presenters today from our final webinar, starting with Alex Balmer. Alex is an award-winning writer, director, performer, accessibility designer, and educator. Alex has worked as an arts professional since 1992 with companies including CBC, the Royal Court Theatre, Buddies in Bad Times, the National Arts Centre, the Boy Choir of Lesbos, London 2012 Olympics, BBC Radio, Common Boots Theatre, and Channel 4 series Cast-Offs. She has been nominated and won many awards. Alex was a UK ARIA Prize finalist for her song-driven radio feature Sounds Like She, a Society of Canadian Musicians award recipient and the writer of the stage play Smudge, which earned 2 Best New Play nominations in Canada and was Time Out magazine's Critics' Choice during the UK premiere. She was literary manager with Grey, the UK leading disability-led theatre company, and has been access demagogue of several outdoor performances and circus parts projects in Canada and the UK. She has offered training and consultation performing arts education, marketing, customer service, and disability conference training for numerous venues and institutions across the UK and Ontario. In 2014, Alex was named one of the most influential disabled artists in UK's Power magazine. Our second amazing presenter today is Andrea Gurza. Andrew is a disability awareness consultant and cripple consultant creator whose written work has been featured on CBC, Daily Extra, Gay Times UK, Huffington Post, The Advocate, Everyday Feminism, Mashable, Outdoor.com, and several anthologies. He was guest on a number of podcasts, including Dan Savage's Savage Love and Cameron Esposito's Query. He has spoken all over North America on sex and disability and what it means to be a queer cripple. He is also the host of Disability After Dark, the podcast shining a bright light on sex and disability, available on all podcast platforms. You can follow the podcast at DisAftDarkPod. That's DisAftDarkPod. He is also the creator of the viral hashtag #DisabledPeopleAreHot. You can find out more about Andrew by going to his website, www.andrewgurza.com, and connecting with him on social media at the Andrew Gurza. I'm just going to check to see if we have everybody online ready to go for the presentations. Is Alex with us?
Hello?
Hi, is that Alex?
It's Erin, and now we're here with Alex. Can everyone see us okay?
Perfect. So I'm going to turn over things to Alex to get us started, and we'll be with her until 12:35. Thank you, Alex. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can I just ask for a time check? What time is it now?
12:16.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate with this webinar entitled Invisible Disabilities and Creative Spaces. Just before I begin, I just want to do a little bit of a language disclosure. I identify as always blind, but not always disabled. And I recognize that the term invisible disabilities may be preferred and used by some people, whereas others may prefer to use invisibly disabled or other terminology to self-identify. And I hope that I use a range of language so that we respect all those different preferences. So to begin, invisible disabilities and creative spaces. What we're going to talk through is essentially, I'm going to try to equip our viewers and listeners to have tools to work together to make a more accessible artistic Ontario. What we're going to talk through is, I want to define who and what we are referring to when we use the term invisible disabilities. I want to identify some of the key threats to inclusion for this community, and I'd like to identify some key solutions and have a look at a case study of a performing arts project called Crip Shorts. So let's begin by just identifying who are we referring to, what are we referring to. The term invisible disabilities is often used, I think, is often understood to be referring to people who have access requirements or disabilities that are not apparent to the eye. They are not seen and therefore assumed to not exist. This is a real problem, and it's actually a lesson, I think, for everyone in working with people who have any access requirement or disability, because no one's access requirements should be assumed to be understood simply by what is seen. One of the key threats to inclusion for this community is a result of that assumption, which essentially leads to silence. A kind of atmosphere where nobody asks, so nobody tells. And environments where people aren't encouraged to communicate do promote that sense of fear that any disclosure of needs may lead to a negative stigma. So one of the key solutions is therefore communication, proactive communication to break that silence. And I'm just going to talk through 3 examples of how you can communicate proactively as an arts organization. So one of the, or as an artist, or anybody serving artists. So Proactive communication. If you are an organization, or if you have a venue, or if you are leading a project, make that bold, clear statement on all of your material, on all of your outgoing public messages, be it websites, phone lines, on walls in your spaces, in Braille. Make it as absolutely known as possible that you champion diversity of access requirements and disability to promote best health for your organization, best accessibility for the communities you serve, and enabling most people to participate fully and meaningfully. One thing I should also just say, because I meant to say it earlier, was that some specific examples of people within this community would include those with neurological diversity, cognitive diversity, people with digestive sensitivities, those who identify as having mental health needs, those with chronic pain or chronic fatigue. Those are just a few examples of who would identify within this community of those who are invisibly disabled. So just getting back to solutions. Another key solution is to move beyond what you assume is seen or not seen and move towards asking. Ask. A-S-K. It's the simplest message I could give. Ask people what their access requirements are. And I really promote the idea of asking about access requirements as the highest priority in terms of the conversation, rather than starting off with asking what medical diagnosis may be. Many people don't need to discuss their medical diagnosis in order to have their access needs met. So ask about access needs. Have that conversation. And an access need could be something like, I will require a quiet room when I attend your venue. I will need flexible working hours. I will need a rehearsal space that is ensured not to have flickering fluorescent lights, or acoustically creates an echo chamber that could trigger anxiety. So ask people for their access requirements. For those who wish to disclose medical diagnosis or medical condition, for whatever reason, likely it could be they need to ensure there is first aid available in the building, give people that option. And I'm talking about employers, I'm talking about artists, and even visitors to your space. Ensure that there is someone in your space who does have some specialized training in first aid, and know who that person is. But for most people, it's more about delivering good customer service that is accessible. And remember, you hold the knowledge of your space. Others hold the knowledge of their needs. Work together. The last thing I would say is be proactive with provisions. There are things you can do before someone walks into your space, before someone shows up 10 minutes before a show starts or the gallery opens. There are provisions you can put in place by imagining beyond the assumed. Again, we get back to this idea of assumptions. Imagine people will come who have never been in your building before. Or simply imagine all the things you can do that can exist already before anyone visits. And these things can include visual stories on your website, a written description about your venue and what to expect when you get there. I'm going to talk through some more specifics about proactive provisions as I move on to my final topic. My final topic is to use Crip Shorts as a case study. Crip Shorts was an event that I was a co-producer and artistic director of last January, that was co-produced by Harbourfront Centre, Tangled Art and Disability, the British Council, Creative Users, and Ryerson Disability Studies. This was a disabled-led performance night that featured 5 brilliant acts that were all informed by disabled artists and their experience of disability. So what we did in order to be proactively prepared, we engaged in access audits. And by that I mean investigating the space for potential access barriers in order to prepare solutions. And when I say the space, that included backstage, the stage itself, and the audience space, plus the entrance into the building, washrooms, all aspects of the environment that people would be traveling through. Looking for, again, those things that could cause barriers or safety issues. Access audits are best done with someone from within the community who understands what to look for in terms of auditing spaces. We also audited the marketing and ticket system and box office systems. Again, some of these things can be really inaccessible. Those online ticket purchasing sites so often time out before people really have had an opportunity to take the time to decide what they want to purchase. It may be due to screen readers slowing down or making the process in need of more time. It may be other concerns such as anxiety in terms of decision making. Slow those websites down. Give people time to buy their ticket and to understand what the event is about. And the other access audit we did was on the artist participants themselves, because all had access requirements. So we did a really thorough audit well in advance of the event. Other things we implemented in terms of the environment. We implemented something called a visual storyboard, which is photographic. It's a photographic story that tells people what to expect upon arrival. It shows the front of the building. It shows what the building looks like when you get into the space, the audience space, the stage. It gives people preparation through visual story to know what to expect when they arrive. We also did a written description of the visual story. What was that?
I'm sorry, we're just about out of time.
Sure. Quick wrap up. Okay. Relaxed performances. Maybe Andrew can talk about this a little more. Relaxed performances, training your staff and volunteers. I'll let Andrew speak more about the specifics, but to wrap up, I think the 3 key messages I would offer is remember that you have the knowledge of your space, others have the knowledge of their needs. Reach out to your potential audiences and visitors. Reversing exclusion takes time. Don't expect it to happen instantly. And just remember, work together to create a more accessible Ontario. And I'll hand it over to Andrew.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was another great presentation full of amazing ideas. I just wanted to quickly recap some of the things that I thought stood out the most. 1, the danger of assuming needs for people who have invisible disabilities. 2, the key threat is nobody asks and nobody tells. We avoiding it creates sometimes a sense of fear and a negative stigma. So it's really important to be very proactive with our communication. We move forward by assuming to ask what requirements are and make sure not to focus on medical diagnosis. They don't have to reveal their medical diagnosis. We want to be proactive with provisions imagined beyond what's assumed, so as the performance approaches. And then the amazing Crip Shorts case study that you mentioned will be an invaluable resource, I'm sure. Now I'm going to be turning things over to Andrew, And Andrew, we're going to ask you to try to wrap things up by 12:50 or so that we have time for questions. Please go ahead. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Just again, just going to do a really quick recap to try to capture some of those amazing ideas. Um, I think one of the important things that you mentioned was that how often people assume that if you're a wheelchair user that you don't have any other disability issues, and certainly they're not considering the idea of invisible disabilities. I love the description you were saying about the show you're putting together, Boys in Chairs, and then thinking not only about the theater showcase, but also what your experience in putting that show together was and the vulnerability that you felt in that experience. Um, I thought it was important you talked about the idea of creating safe space where people can ask for what they need. I love that you've got shows coming up not only in 2019, but also going ahead in 2020. I really hope to get a chance to get out. And I'm sure a lot of the people attending today will be looking to come out too. Um, the idea of firsthand knowledge on giving feedback to venues for what the physical and mental health or other invisible disabilities needs are, sort of creating a much better awareness. And repeating some of the things we heard from Alex about signage on the walls, the importance of making sure information is available on websites and through the phone lines. I like the idea on the websites of having options when you're buying the tickets to identify as having accessibility needs to help the people at front of house consider what's going to be needed and when. And then perhaps even affecting what their just standard setup is to be inclusive to more people without having to ask. Um, I also appreciated your idea about streaming events so that people who can't leave the house and physically be there in person can participate, benefit, and share in the beauty. Relaxed performances is something we've been hearing more about, but it was great to hear you talking and providing resources for that. And the importance of scent-free spaces. People with multiple chemical sensitivities are constantly contacting me saying, nobody's talking about this. And it's a huge problem. Okay, so we have some time for some questions from participants for both of our presenters. If you have a question for a particular presenter or for both presenters, please go ahead and type it now in the chat box, or remember you can send it by email instead to Aaron@artsbuildontario.ca. Okay, so Maria has already written in saying, I would like to book both of you to speak to the Department of Canadian Heritage. That's really cool. Um, I'm sure we'll figure out a way for Maria for you to get in touch with them. Um, Natalie says she has a scent issue. It's very hard to find or to police scent-free space. Do you have any suggestions about that? Yeah, I think that's a very good point. It's a struggle sometimes to, particularly as Canadians, we feel like we have to apologize for the things that we ask for, but a scent is a barrier, and if someone's violating the scent or the scent-free zone, I was at an event for the consultations on the Accessible Canada Act where the hotel had done so many great things to make the event very accessible, but they'd forgotten to remove the scented soap in the bathrooms. So there was a problem that came up there, and the hotel was great. They apologized. They immediately removed that soap, and the rest of the event went off very well. Um, we have another question here about the idea of online ticketing and customer service training. And the question's from Michelle asking, is there a suggested or preferred language when asking patrons over the phone or I guess in person about any invisible disability requests they may have? So one of the things that I think a lot of people don't think about from a built environment perspective, when you're putting together what your requirements are in renovating or creating new spaces, is thinking about the interior quality, which is something we talk about for green design a lot, but not something we think about for a scent-free environment. So the how much fresh air is being put into the environment, how do you manage fresh air? To try to mitigate. One of the things people with multiple chemical sensitivities talk about is it's not just perfume, but it can be off gassing from equipment, assistive equipment that other people are using. So even if you ask people not to wear scents, how can they, is there a place in the space where they can be getting access to more fresh air? And that's like almost none of our clients have that on their radar. And because accessibility consultants often are not a part of the conversation early enough, that it's the kind of thing I really wish more people were including when they were thinking about their planning for their spaces. Okay, we have a couple of other amazing questions here. Unfortunately, some time to do it. Um, is the UK Access um, service confidential? And if I register there, would it be effective in Canada yet? Okay, so the UK registry you were talking about, the UK Access Service, is that something that's used here in Canada yet, or is that something restricted to just the UK? I have a question from Amanda. Do you have suggestions for artists with invisible disabilities that might limit their energy and capacity to participate in rehearsal or during creation time? How can they balance their access needs with the desire to create within external timeline and budget constraints? Thank you very much. I think that was a really good answer. Go ahead, Alex. Okay. I would wholeheartedly agree. I think in the built environment, we're constantly talking about flexible and adaptable design that allows people to have their needs changed and met in different ways. It actually works very well with the idea of green design. There's a lot of overlap between the green design objectives we have and accessible design, because green design really wants to try to create a space that has a longevity to it. And there are many smart green design choices as you're looking at green products that would also make the space much more accessible. This is an article I wrote back in 2011, but it's a message that I still keep trying to get out. The importance of flexible and adaptable. But I think I would also add consistency and predictability is really useful as well. And I think when people are coming up with solutions, I really love the ArtsBuild is involved with this in their community, trying to share information so that we're breaking down silos where people are problem solving in individual spaces, but that they could be bringing that information and sharing that information so that other people don't have to A, work as hard, and B, that people attending events or performing in events are finding this consistency and predictability that makes it easier so you don't have to keep relearning everything. Lighting is another thing that a lot of people don't talk about and consider. Um, I'm glad you both mentioned signage. These are things I think that are really important. They have a question here also from Michelle about dressing room areas, um, and how often back of house is in heritage buildings or older buildings, or even some new buildings, because it's not in the building code, about back of house not really being very accessible and very limiting. How have you dealt with that in your own experiences, and are you aware of more resources or solutions for people who have older buildings to provide access? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to hold you there given the time. Um, I know we have lots more information to share. Thank you so much to everyone for participating. That's all the time we have for questions. We did have a few things just to quickly wrap up before we end the session. The webinars are all available online. So you can watch the 5 previous webinars already on the ArtsBuild website, and this one will be available very soon as well. We've provided the recordings, the slides, and the transcriptions. Please also be aware that we have the Accessibility and Creative Spaces, a toolkit for Ontario arts organizations that's soon to be released on Tuesday, May 28th. You'll definitely want to check that out. Lots of the resources, all of the resources from this series are in that book, plus many others. And we wanted to take the time to recognize and thank the Accessibility Advisory Committee from the ArtsBuild Ontario for informing the content for the webinars in this 6-part series. Please remember that we are going to be sending you a link to some feedback and a survey so that you can tell us what was great about today's webinar, what we might improve for future webinars. We'd also, of course, like to thank the Ontario government for their support of this project. Thank you again to Alex and Andrew for your wonderful presentations and your thoughtful answers. And thank you to you, the participants who joined us today. We hope you found the webinar useful and wish that you have